This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 13th of November 2022 at home in Wicklow. And it is an episode about using one's voice to advocate for the greater good. Fundamentally, that's what I'm talking about today. And I focus on a couple of very renowned figures from the worlds of music and film, and how they've used their respective platforms to preach a certain belief system, value system, a certain vision of how they'd like life to be. Or in some cases, how just a very frank look at how life is. So this is partly inspired by the Qatar World Cup and FIFA's attempts to censor footballing teams, nations who are protesting or want to protest about the human rights violations in Qatar. And it's also inspired in part by listening to Bruce Springsteen's Broadway show and the recording of that show from a few years ago, which was essentially an extended retrospective monologue interspersed with songs from his back catalogue. Bruce Springsteen, if you didn't know, is quite a formidable storyteller. And I've always been very attracted to that aspect of his persona and his performances. So ultimately I'm talking about speaking truth to power and appealing to our better angels, as they say. So that's what's coming up. I hope you enjoy it. I will see you around the corner. Cheers.
Not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind. Keep my mojo.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. You're very, very well. That's a good start. You're very welcome. You are very welcome to this humble endeavour. Yes, you are very welcome, or very welcome, to yet another episode of earnestness, of earnest yearning. I'm going to write a poem called Ernie Burner, the Earnest Yearner, and it'll be a little parody of my own leanings and inclinations. Anyway, what we do here, and when I say we, I'm using the royal we because it's I. But what we do here on The Clear Out, on The Tell, is explore wellness. Explore the effort to live well. Explore the negotiation of that, the difficulty of that. And it's basically it's a long running, ongoing conversation, reflection, negotiation, striving for understanding, and it is always the best I can do with the information available at the time. And I think that is as much as any of us can do at any time. Now, over time, we may come up with a formula that suits us. We may come up with a formula that suits us. And we may be able to reduce things to certain touchstones, certain principles. And in my case, one of those touchstones is be ever open to change. Because the fixed position, I think, is unsustainable. The fixed position is suggestive of a rigidity of thought, which I don't think is conducive to wellness. So if that is in some way evocative of a Zen middle way, a Zen presence of mind, presence of body, presence of spirit, that's a reasonable projection or a reasonable assumption. I think I'm probably Zen adjacent, if you'll permit that coinage. So yeah. Anyway, that's what's going on. And I mean, really, you know, if you're a new listener, just go back and listen to episode 1 where I sort of lay it out. I lay out where this came from, and I lay out how it was an evolution from my blog, which, of the same name, The Clear Out, and the subtitle of that blog was Decluttering, Clarifying, Connecting. So those 3 words become the sort of unifying principle of what I continue to try to do here on the Clear Out podcast. So there you go. That's it. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, I won't know until I listen back. But I'm taking a punt on recording in a new space, and that means there may be some sounds, there may be some environmental sounds in the background, because I've got 2 guinea pigs to the left of me, and they can be quite vocal. Now, as it happens, the cats are outside, so unless one of them comes to the door, it'll just be me, you, and the guinea pigs. And also I have the stove lit. So you may or may not hear. No, it's quiet. The stove is quiet. I was going to say you may hear the crackle of the fire. A very evocative sound, in my opinion. Very atmospheric, very ambient. I just felt like a change, and I just thought, you know what, it's kind of quiet here. And as mentioned in recent episodes, I am toute seule. I am all alone at the moment in #blessed. The women in my life are away in the land down under. So that's another reason why I can presume to do this here now. I am, just like last week, I've put myself on the clock. This week has been shaken up a little bit. Now, by the time this comes out, that'll be of no relevance to you or me anymore, but I've had to kind of just reschedule things. I normally do this in the middle of the week, but I saw a window and I thought I'll sit down and do this, and it may mean it'll be a somewhat truncated episode. No bad thing, says you. Maybe not. Anyway, a couple of things on my mind at the moment. I think I'm sort of in a somber kind of mood. I referred in last week's episode to a couple of family members in vulnerable positions, and one of those, and this is my extended family, but part of the kind of the clan, and one of them passed away sadly last week, and that kind of thing always gives one pause for thought and makes one stop thinking about oneself, in my case anyway, and sort of extends your heart to the suffering of others and to those close to you who are really at the closest to that grief. That's sort of, there's an undercurrent of that maybe informing my thinking at the moment. And I had a visit today with one of the other vulnerable family members, vulnerable, I suppose, is a bit euphemistic. This is a family member who is negotiating the last stages of his life, and has been a great figure for me in my life, and a very good male presence in my life, and very caring and thoughtful and guiding, and a sort of a non-judgmental, safe place, which I think is so crucial for many of us when we're growing up and young, adolescents and young adults. So I suppose that's put me on a certain track in my thinking. And I'm not really going to speak specifically to that. That's maybe another episode if we're talking about grief, if we're talking about loss, bereavement, death, losing important people in your life. That's not really the focus of this episode, but it's just a bit of a backdrop, I suppose. I have other things I want to touch on. What I might start with, and I won't spend too long on this, and it's just a bit of a soapbox moment, a bit of a rant. The World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, the soccer World Cup, the football World Cup is upon us. It kicks off next week, and it is being held in Qatar. And I don't think in my lifetime, or as long as I've been aware of the existence of the World Cup, as long as I've been a football fan, as long as I've had people in my life who are passionate football fans, I don't think I've ever encountered such ambivalence, such not caring, such a lack of interest in the World Cup, and more extreme emotional reactions. People are just highly critical of the World Cup being given to Qatar whenever it was appointed several years ago, under the stewardship of the head of FIFA at that time, one Sepp Blatter, who to my mind represents everything that is disgusting, despicable, immoral, dishonest and disingenuous about large institutional leadership, and the sort of the cynical cash grab of these and specifically sporting organisations, the sort of committee men, backhander, jobs for the boys mentality, and Qatar is really an emblem of sports washing. The idea of a country with a very bad human rights record, a country which has no particular history of a cultural connection to football, and a country that sees the opportunity of cleansing its image by hosting one of the biggest sporting events in the world. And I suppose the thinking is on, the thinking is, well, this is a way to say, we're given a pass. We're given the blessing of FIFA. We're given the blessing of the world football community because they've allowed us to host this event, and therefore it bestows upon us a certain credibility and respectability and worthiness. But I think if you're in a different camp, you actually care about where the World Cup is held. You care about how citizens are treated in that country. You care about the values that are upheld in the society of that country. You care about how workers are treated. You care about how vulnerable citizens are treated. You care about the human rights of all citizens of that country. You care about women's rights. You care about gay rights. And when a country that has a very dubious track record in those areas is given the golden ticket to host the World Cup, there's a conflict. There's a moral conflict. And it certainly seems evident to me, having conversations with my friends and different family members who are football people, and reading various opinion pieces and below the line comments on various articles, that for a lot of football fans there's a conflict. There's something wrong about the tournament being held in Qatar, the tournament being held at this time of year, the tournament being held in the middle of the football season. There's no precedent for this in the hosting of the World Cup, certainly not in the modern era of football, not that I'm aware of anyway. So it represents a sort of an arrogance on FIFA's part. It represents Sepp Blatter's arrogance and his disingenuousness, because it just seems from the outside that all, as much as one of his stated missions was to kind of spread football, grow football, and give opportunities to other places to embrace the world of football, you just think ultimately he was just chasing the money. It's hard not to believe that. And Qatar, it's been documented during the build up to the World Cup how poorly, in fact, how appallingly migrant workers have been treated in Qatar. Workers who've come to contribute to that event economy, and the workers working on building stadia, and workers who are plugged into the larger growing hospitality market for the World Cup period. And in the football world itself, there's been a lot of comment, a lot of reaction, and a lot of clear messaging from certain footballing nations in this area of human rights, workers' rights, gay rights, women's rights. The Australian football team, for example, has been outspoken and delivered a public message from some of the members of the football team. The Danish football team wanted to get FIFA's blessing to train in a training kit that was advocating human rights for all. And in the last 24 hours, Qatar issued a statement, sent a letter. It was a letter, I think, sent out to the various footballing nations, the participants in the World Cup, which basically said, stay out of politics, shut up and play football. Now, I'm obviously paraphrasing massively, but stick to football is the quote. That's what was grabbed from the letter. And it's an astonishing position of, from FIFA, from this body. It's an astonishing position, which is basically saying, don't care about where you play, don't care about the rights of football fans, don't care about who gets to host this huge event watched by gazillions all around the world every 4 years. Don't care about any of that. Just do your job and play football. And there's something so grotesque about that position of FIFA. There's something so ignorant. There's something so insulting to the average or representative, whatever that is, football fan. Because the football fans, we're following this story. We're following this story. We follow the teams. We follow the players from the clubs we support. We follow players from other clubs, other countries. And we care. You know, yeah, of course, primarily we're interested in the football. We want to see those players play well. We're interested in the drama that plays out on the football pitch. But many, many fans, it's clear that many fans care about things other than football as well. And they care when footballers take a position and show their moral core. And it's not, you know, that's not a simple aspiration or a simple acknowledgement. It's not saying it should all be conflated, that all footballers should have a strong moral position, that all footballers should have a strong political vision for the world, that all footballers should be socialists or egalitarian advocates. It's not as naive or simplistic as that, because again, that's not very interesting. But this particular World Cup, it's so clear that the footballers themselves are going, this isn't cool. Going to Qatar and being in a country where people's rights have been compromised, taken away from them, flouted, whatever. Footballers care. And maybe that's just footballers going, this is the right thing to think, this is the right thing to say at this time. It doesn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, like, the net result is footballers wanting to stand up and take a position. And maybe that's a product, or a consequence of people being just a little bit more switched on to social issues. Maybe it is as cynical as the suggestion I made a moment ago about, you know, managing image and being on message. But my sense is that it's real. My sense is that it's coming from a sincere place. And FIFA responding to the, you know, responding to the personnel that bring so much money and so many eyeballs and so much status to their sport, and the personnel who populate the national teams that compete in the World Cup, that attract this worldwide audience. For FIFA to just say, kind of, shut up and do your job, stick to football, you know, that's not for you to think about or talk about. It really tells you everything you need to know about FIFA. That they're not interested in anything that gets in the way of the money. That they're not looking at footballers as rounded, representative people, as much as, you know, multi-millionaire guys in their 20s playing football are representative. But there can be an alliance of thinking between footballers and fans, taking aside the gilded lifestyle, because of the proximity of how fans follow those lives and follow those footballers, and the social media presence of many footballers and where they play out their public lives. And for me, I just feel that position of FIFA's is really them sticking their fingers up to all the fans. To all the fans as well. Because it's kind of saying to the fans, just ignore this distracting story. Just come and pay those prices. Come to Qatar, pay the prices, come to the match. Keep pouring your hard-earned money into our coffers. And don't for a millisecond tarnish this spin, this glossy image with your moral concerns. You know, human rights. Don't with your social justice warrior nonsense. Just shut up and enjoy the football. Don't rock the boat. I mean, it's a Walt Disney level of image control. It's a Walt Disney level of don't dare peek behind the curtains. But they're so off. They're so off. They're so not feeling the temperature of fans who are just more and more jaded and sick of the cynical, mercenary cash grab that so many football organisations, executives, higher ups, investors, takeover owners that they represent. Just let's milk this money cow for all it's worth, and the last thing they give a shit about is the fans. And most fans are, I don't know. I mean, like, God, who am I to speak for fans? I mean, I just know, like, guys that people that I know are football fans. They're very rounded, complex people who aren't just there to enjoy the football, that have political viewpoints, who care about, many other things other than kicking that round ball around the pitch for 90 minutes, even though they can be passionate about that, and many of us are. So yeah, it's weird. It's weird to be kind of thinking, this World Cup just feels so tarnished. It just feels like a horrendous public relations disaster that's about to happen. I'll be really curious to see what kind of viewing figures are going to, the World Cup's going to get. I'm really curious to see what kind of protests there'll be. I'm curious to see, will players risk the censure of FIFA by having their own protests and getting booked or fined or whatever. I'm curious to see what football associations will go, do you know what? No. Because this it's not a football issue, it's a human issue. And maybe that really is ultimately the point. That maybe people are just going, things are bad enough in the world. And if you're going to try and censor us and stop us having a voice and stopping us saying, do you know what? I think that's wrong. It's, FIFA, it shouldn't be a police state. But that's the impression you get. These suits who are like, hey, we've got a lot of money to make here, and we don't need you whinging in the background and distracting people and making people furrow their brows or raise an eyebrow and go, maybe all is not as it seems. Anyway, it disgusts me. It absolutely disgusts me. And Sepp Blatter is pretty much, for all the dictators and dodgy populist politicians in the world and mercenary companies, Sepp Blatter is really probably one of the highest people on my my hate list. I don't really go in for hate that much, but Sepp Blatter, my God, that man, his venality, his criminality, his arrogance, his contempt for football fans, for just everything that's decent in sport, never ceases to stop offending me. No, never ceases. Yeah. Did a double negative there. Hold on. It never ceases to offend me. It never stops offending me. That's what I want to say. It never ceases to stop. What? Okay. Anyway, so kind of indirectly further to that, the idea of calling out bad behavior, the idea of calling out immorality, the idea of standing up and going, this is really a source of despair, a source of concern, a source of rage, of indignation, of heartbreak, of disgust, and what are we willing to do about it? That idea of getting up on your soapbox. I just want to spend the rest of this episode just talking about this idea of the voice that cares, the voice that speaks truth to power, the voice that feels an imperative to speak, to try and be heard, to speak to the sense of voicelessness of others, I suppose. So fundamentally, what I'm talking about here is the idea of a spokesperson. And I'm interested in the artistic voice within that context. And the artistic voice that doesn't just stick to football, so to speak. The artistic voice that doesn't just stick to play the tunes or make a nice story. The artistic voice that feels compelled to think bigger, to think larger, and to express that. And the artistic voice often channels that into their work. But this line of thinking was prompted specifically by my listening to Bruce Springsteen on Broadway. Bruce Springsteen, 5 years ago, maybe more recently than that, did a limited run of shows in Broadway where he basically put together a show that was like a career retrospective, and I think he did it with a very pared back band, and it was a night of storytelling interspersed with some of his most famous songs. And my wife gifted me the double CD a few years ago when we were still in Melbourne, and it's not something you just casually throw on in the background. It demands a sit down and listen, or in many ways very like a podcast. Stick it in your ears while you're doing something else, and it's really interesting. I mean, it's a really interesting recording, and it captures Bruce Springsteen at a time in his life where there's a lot of looking back, because maybe there's not so much looking forward. I'm not exactly sure what age Springsteen is now, but he has to be around 70, doesn't he? I'll just do a quick check. But the funny thing is that style of Bruce Springsteen delivery and his relationship with monologuing, for want of a better word, that goes back a long way. He's 73. There you go, a young man in his prime. He has a long history of storytelling in his shows. I remember as a kid, my brother, my older brother, when he was a teenager, he was up to all kinds of shenanigans would be the preferred euphemism here. Shenanigans, a little bit of this and that, low level capers on the other side of the law, shall we say. Anyway, he came home one time with a bag of CDs, and in that, no, not CDs, what am I talking about? A bag of tapes, bag of cassettes. And amongst other things in that bag of cassettes, one was the best of hot chocolate. And if you believe in miracles, you know, you love that. You love that now. Bit of hot chocolate, gorgeous. Which I did listen to a bit. But he also had in there was it a double cassette? It may have even been like a quadruple cassette of the best of Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, which was that like 1975 to 1981. I probably don't have those dates exactly right, but yeah, it was a double or a quadruple, as they said, live album of Bruce and the E Street Band doing their shows, and that was interspersed with the same thing. 40 years earlier, Bruce Springsteen was taking the time to tell stories, and tell stories of his, from his life, these personal monologues, and I used to love listening to them. And maybe that was I don't know, there's something kind of actorly about them, and a good storyteller is a great thing to listen to, just as a bad storyteller is not. And Bruce Springsteen, and it's not like I'm a massive Bruce Springsteen fan. I mean, obviously, I know some of the hits and the more popular songs. I'm not in deep with the boss. I do remember Born in the USA, that album just being massive as a kid and getting played a lot. And then I think, was the Tunnel of Love? Was that the follow-up album? And I was kind of mystified by that, because there was none of that kind of bombastic, the barrage of bombastic hits. But I think what I did recognise about Bruce Springsteen was a sort of a frankness and an authenticity about his voice, particularly in his storytelling. He was just a very simple kind of guy from Jersey, and there was a kind of a blue collar realness to his stories of personal reflection and struggle and triumph. And so when I listened to the Broadway recording from a couple of years ago, I was like, oh yeah, well this chimes with exactly what he was doing, what he's been doing all along. And I was trying to think, of these sort of famous frontmen in bands, like who else steps up to, in that kind of role, because it is a bit soapboxy. And certainly in the Broadway thing, there was a real political thing in there, and an earnestness and a sincerity, and a total lack of ambiguity in terms of nailing his colours to the mast. And I think I've always sort of responded to that when the message feels like one I like, when the message feels like something good, when the message feels like it's about egalitarianism, about people just being given enough to get along. I think that's the way I'd put it. It's not this grandiose ambition for more. It's a humble ambition for enough to retain one's dignity, enough to allow one's decency be rewarded with the provision of sufficient. And I feel that's kind of where Bruce Springsteen was coming from, his stories of just normal people. And so he he's a great American voice in that regard, I think, regardless of the mode of music, which sometimes, in my opinion, is a bit over the top or a bit bombastic, a bit one note. Although my wife said years ago what he's very good at, and bear in mind my wife's a musician and songwriter, now music therapist, what she said he's very good at is writing songs to his strengths as a singer and performer. And of course he's renowned for his stamina as a performer, like his epic shows, 3 hours, 3.5 hours. And even there's something about that's kind of, there's a selflessness. Although you might argue it's just this monstrous ego trip. I don't think so, though. But in any case, I was kind of thinking about, who else ticks that box. And Bono, of all people, came to mind. Bono of U2. And Bono was someone, when I was a kid, he used to just aggravate the hell out of me. I just, oh my God, this guy. He's just so self-serious. He's so pompous and narcissistic. And over time, I've kind of come to appreciate him and kind of go, you know what? Bono was there right from the get-go, nailing his colours to the mast, and unapologetically outspoken about his beliefs and his striving to speak for the masses, which is kind of excruciating in a younger man, I suppose. But U2 were always, they were kind of always in that camp, and where, it's part of what's amazing and brilliant and fascinating about them, and also kind of what's ridiculous about them, I think, at times. And yet it speaks to exactly what I'm talking about. He's not, Bono was never going to stay in his lane and just write rock songs, pop songs, whatever you want to call them. He had a bigger story to tell and was completely unafraid to do that. And now he's out there, I believe, making, isn't he going to do a show based on, he's written an autobiography. And he, there's a guy who can talk. So I guess I recognise that. There's a kinship. And yet I've come to a point of really admiring that outspokenness, even though it's kind of gauche and it's not cool, and it's completely lacking in cynicism, and that is something that I do respond to, because I think I've nailed my own colours to the mast very clearly in different episodes of the podcast and in the pieces I wrote over 8 or 9 years on the blog. That I'm like, yeah, say what you think, say what you feel, put it out there, don't be afraid. What are you risking? Because for me, it's a great clarifying. It's a great clarifying endeavour to try to articulate yourself and to articulate your indignation, to articulate what you care about, to articulate what you believe in, to articulate who you're concerned about, to articulate your anger at those you feel should care more, and to try and use your voice to express something that maybe others can't, or lack interest in, or haven't thought about, or I don't know. And this isn't proselytizing. It's not an attempt to recruit or form an army of outspoken pains in the arse. But there is something in the mix there, which is like Jesus, you know, somebody has to speak. Someone has to use their voice. And when it comes in the form of a frontman for a band, I don't know, that can be. I don't know. Is that a hard pill to swallow, or is that the best place for it? You know, these people who have huge followings, huge audiences, have made people fall in love with them through their music, and then say, by the way, think about Rwanda. By the way, think about Black Lives. By the way, let's think about our better angels. Let's think about the unifying force of human decency and compassion and empathy and, righteousness. Because cynicism would go, shut up. Cynicism would go, come on now, just let the machine roll. Let the machine churn us all up. Let the machine destroy everything good and precious, because there's money to be made. Let the machine push you into Thatcherism. Let the machine just make you look out for yourself and not give a shit about anybody else, because that's what the machine wants. The machine wants you just to consume. The machine wants you to set aside your values, your morals, your ethics, your sense of, we're better than this. We should be better than this. People deserve better than this. And it's interesting to me that maybe this is a privilege that maybe men are afforded more readily than women. Because I was asking myself, you know, who were the female spokespeople? And for some reason, Maya Angelou came to mind. For some reason, Toni Morrison came to mind. African American women, very strong voices. I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking of women from Irish media. Maybe someone like Nell McCafferty. You know, the very, very. If I think of Nell McCafferty, I just think of like the strength of her voice, the strength of her personality, her, you know, a woman of kind of strong convictions and unafraid to say what she thought, unafraid to speak truth to power. I don't know. I mean, in many ways, I suppose my mother was a bit of a template for that as well. I think I've spoken about that before. I don't feel there was any shortage of strong, or what I perceived to be strong, outspoken women. I mean, these were, you know, women who came up with the first wave of kind of the women's lib movement, I guess, and, you know, women who were maybe a bit more on the kind of alternative side of things, politicized, educated, intelligent, passionate, artistic, creative, you know, mothers, wives, partners, whatever. I mean, and these were the women who populated the, you know, my house, the house of my parents' friends, and I kind of admired them all. And they said that was sort of the template that I saw. These weren't women who stood in the background. They weren't women who were, you know, and of course my, you know, great, amazing women in my extended family, my aunts, my grandmothers, spokespeople. I don't know. I mean, of course, actions speak louder than words, they say. But then, you know, when you have a platform, that's a very powerful place. The other person I was thinking of, someone who has been a kind of a truth sayer for a long time, is Spike Lee. I mentioned Spike Lee, didn't I, in a recent episode? I can't think why. I can't remember why at this moment. Spike Lee, I'm a huge fan. I've always been a huge fan. I got on board the Spike Lee train very early. His early movies, school days, and she's got to have it, and Do the Right Thing was just this moment that, for me, that was 89, so I would have been 15. I think it just encapsulated a sort of a vital sort of just this no holds barred look at race and identity in the most emphatic, in your face Spike Lee way, with so much colour, so much flavour, so much punch, so much bite, so much sex, so much aggression. And it felt so over the top and so real and so honouring of voices, and so like, let me take it to the front line of the war on race, and how he just was like, these are the people who are at the front line, and everyone is hypercritical and hypersensitive to the hypocrisies of every other group except their own. Everyone's like just tearing each other down, and like Do the Right Thing just brought you to this intersection of sort of racial rage and indignation and hurt and sensitivity and insensitivity, and a willingness to spit in each other's faces, and brilliant. And I said, oh God, this guy is just mental. He's just off the charts, and he just goes there, and he's continued to go there throughout his career. And I think he's brilliant. I think he's a brilliant filmmaker. I love his storytelling. I love his fearlessness. I love his audacity as a filmmaker and a storyteller, and what he's willing to do with his camera, and the colours he puts on the screen, and you know, something that's not maybe trumpeted enough, because usually, oh yeah, Spike Lee, a political filmmaker, you know, that voice that just won't shut up. But he's so much more than that. He's such an accomplished filmmaker, and he's a great stager of musical numbers. I rewatched Malcolm X recently. Malcolm X is 30 years old, and again, you know, I think there's two big musical numbers, like I said, in dance halls in Malcolm X, and he's brilliant, Spike Lee. What he sees and what he can stage and what he makes come alive in front of the camera. And I think his weakness is his fondness for polemic, his fondness for just being too on the nose with his message. And sometimes, in my opinion, that undercuts the effectiveness of the artistic vision and the effectiveness of the narrative. But maybe there's a part of me that goes, yeah, but that's his soapbox. And that's him saying, I don't care, because this is a message that needs to be heard. This message needs to be heard, and I don't care that I'm sticking it right in your face again and again and again. Let me underline this again and again and again. Let me put 15 exclamation marks after this sentence, because you're not listening, because nothing's changing. So I'm going to be here. I'm going to be here until it's not worth talking about anymore, in the best sense, that we are beyond it, that we have moved to a better place. And I think that's, you know, that's what I respond to. I love that passion. I love that willingness to be uncool and go, yeah, why, you know, I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still going to talk about this stuff. And Bono does that, and Bruce Springsteen does that, and Spike Lee does that. And I kind of love it. I kind of love these people who have an artistic voice and are willing to use that gift. Because don't kid yourself, there's poetry there. There's poetry, and if Spike Lee is street poetry, if Spike Lee is hip hop, Bono, and Bono is this kind of sort of what Bono's like Bono's kind of pretentiousness, I think, calls back something mythic, something shamanistic, something druidic. He's trying to be that guy in an age of, I was going to say an age of concrete and steel, but maybe that's that's completely anachronistic. This is the age of silicon, is it? Is this the age of silicon? Are we even beyond that? If you're looking at people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg just cutting through their staff with the grim reapers of ruthless capitalism, and just going, what do we value? What do they value? They value the bottom line. They're businessmen. They're not particularly egalitarian. Like, what do they represent? They I don't know. Are they the robber bandits, robber barons of tech, and these kind of megalomaniac nerds who don't really value people? It's a weird one. I mean, they're kind of visionary in their way in terms of what they see technologically, what they understand about what can be done to people, to the human interface. And yet, I don't know. Who would you like? Do you want to go and sit down and listen to Elon Musk talk about his vision for humanity, or listen to Mark Zuckerberg talk about his aspirations for humanity? I don't think so. I mean, I would rather listen to Bono, even though he might irritate the shit out of me. I would rather listen to Bruce Springsteen. I'd love to listen to Spike Lee. Now, Spike Lee, his mode is film. His mode is filmic storytelling. Yeah. So, I don't know. And it's interesting as well, because I'm gonna read you a quote I just saw before I pressed record. I was just online looking at some Facebook stuff, and came across this. So this is a quote from Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, and it comes from his 1942 collection, The Art of Philosophizing and Other Essays. And he says, if you wish to become a philosopher, the first thing to realize is that most people go through life with a whole world of beliefs that have no sort of rational justification, and that one man's world of beliefs is apt to be incompatible with another man's, so that they cannot both be right. People's opinions are mainly designed to make them feel comfortable. Truth, for most people, is a secondary consideration. Now, you could argue that that's a very cynical position. You could argue that that's Bertrand Russell going, people wrap themselves in delusion because that's comfortable, that's cozy. And truth is not really the priority. People aren't grasping for truth. People are grasping for comfort. And maybe Bertrand Russell is just talking in purely philosophical terms, and maybe he's talking about philosophical rigor and the examination of ideas and the examination of beliefs, and that type of application of one's intellect, of one's mind, the application to knowledge and understanding, and the idea of what can be known. But if we draw a line back to what I'm talking about, I use the phrase speak truth to power. And sometimes that's not that clinical. Sometimes that's not that cold. That's not something that's formed in laboratory conditions. But I think that is one of the most vital roles of the artist, of the interpreter, of the person who's on the fringes, as many artists are, as many creative voices are, as many creative eyes are. They're looking from the outside, and sometimes they're looking from the inside, but they are observers and interpreters, and they articulate the human experience. They articulate the reflection. They articulate something that comes back to us as the consumers of the art. They articulate something that says, don't forget this. Don't forget this is what's happening. Don't forget this is what we're doing. Don't forget this is what we're capable of. Don't forget that we can be better than this. And that's... what is that? Is that an emotional truth? Is that something felt and believed with such passion? I think that's something we recognise. And sophists and cynics and internet trolls, they'll argue with you 57 ways to Sunday. They'll argue with you out of that, to put you into knots, to shatter your instinct, to shatter your intuition, to shatter what your guts tell you is true. Because those people thrive on, I don't know if they thrive on the sensation of being right, or they thrive on the sensation of proving you wrong in a very intellectual, tricksy, cold, heartless way. And you might go, oh, well, that's naive, because there's a place for that. Yeah, I mean, if that place is point scoring, if that place is, let me just put another pin in your heart, let me just put another pin in your naive belief that we should be walking on this track that keeps us moving towards a better version of ourselves, that keeps us thoughtful and cognizant of the importance of caring about others, of thinking about the bigger picture, of wanting to shake our fists at the injustice of cynical, mercenary, uncaring institutions, fearful governments, people who are being cowed into silence. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in that cynicism, that sophistry, that naysaying, the people who want to steal magic from the world, the people who want to bring down the darkness and have us trudge with our shoulders slumped and our hands in our pockets, just not caring and just going, nah, this is as good as it's ever going to get, and defeat is inevitable, and don't bother hold your soul in a precious place, because there's no point, because it's going to get consumed like everything else. So just give up now. And what I say to that is, fuck that. If you'll forgive the language. I'm not interested. I'm not interested. I am not interested in that. Because I see the value in human connection. I see the value in caring. I see the value in living part of yourself through others. I see the value in caring about others and loving others. That's where life is lived. That's where life has meaning. And part of that meaning is the values that you share, the convictions that you share, the emotional truth that you can feel pass between you and inform your connection and inform your love. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. So, I don't know. Speak up. Speak your truth. Speak your love. Speak your compassion. Speak your care. Speak for those who cannot. Speak for the migrant workers in Qatar. And celebrate the footballers who want to protest. Celebrate the footballers who want to say something of meaning, of care. And yes, please do join me in despising FIFA's cowardice, their moral equivocation, their ethical invisibility. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Thank you for being a part of this project, this effort. I really do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you again next week. Wherever you're listening to this, just you'll find the other links for social media, for throwing some support at this podcast, which I will continue to do because I value it. I value what I'm doing here, even if no one else does. Okay, take care, stay safe, as always, mind yourselves, and maybe mind some other people as well. Okay, take care. Lots of love. All the best. Cheers.